Hello, my name is Richard Medcalf, founder of Xquadrant. I coach some of the world's top executives and management teams, helping them achieve bigger and more meaningful results than ever before. In this season, I'm speaking with C-suite leaders from around the globe to find out what the COVID-19 pandemic has taught them and what wisdom they have to share for other leaders. Welcome to Leadership Lessons for Challenging Times. Today I'm speaking with Ben Page, who is the UK CEO for Ipsos Mori, a global research company. Ben's got 30 years of experience in this sector, incredible tenure as an executive, and he's lived multiple business crises, including the 2008 financial crisis, where he was also the UK general manager. I think what you'll find in the interview is how he talks in a very human way about what it's like to be CEO, dealing with several thousand employees, and is also brutally realistic about the need not to succumb to our optimism bias and to focus on the worst case scenarios as well as what we hope will happen. So listen in. Ben has got a lot of wisdom to share, and he shares it in a very casual and engaging way. So I hope you enjoy this conversation with Ben Page. Hi, Ben. Good to see you.
Hello. Good morning.
Well, great to have you here. Before we go any further, why don't we just start with like a quick 2-minute elevator pitch or introduction. Just tell us who you are and what Ipsos Mori is for those rare people who don't know.
Okay, so I'm Chief Exec of Ipsos Mori in the UK and Ireland. I'm on the Global Management Committee of Ipsos. We're a large global research and information organisation. We're about 19,000 people globally. I'm responsible for about 1,500 of them in Britain and Ireland, and we look at everything human beings think or do, basically. Our biggest clients are people like Google and Facebook, or large manufacturers like Unilever, but we also we think we're one of the largest providers of research to governments around the world. So that's broadly us, and we're everything about how people make decisions and trying to provide intelligence and analysis for decision makers across the public and private sector. I've been there for 32 years, having started there at the age of 5.
Wow, so yeah, you started as the paper boy and has now become the global.
Well, I was slightly older. I think I was 22. But anyway, there we go.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Brilliant. So that's the intro. So we'll perhaps get on to some of the research findings that might be relevant to people in times of crisis or in challenging times. But first of all, how as a business have you at Ipsos Mori, in the UK, had to adapt to COVID-19, right? It's hit pretty fast, pretty unexpected.
I mean, it's like the 2008 recession at high speed, but with the added complication, of course, that we still do about £45 million worth of face-to-face interviewing a year for the government and for media owners who want a fully representative samples rather than online panels, which is the bulk of market research. And so, of course, we had to make a decision to furlough hundreds of interviewers who do that work. And of course, there's now a big question about when it will restart. We've transferred some of it online into telephone, and we've converted some of the face-to-face interviewers to become remote telephone interviewers, because some of our clients just need continuous data, and if we can gather it by telephone, they will be happy with that. So we've done some of that. There's also just some people like, receptionists, etc., who we've had to furlough because there is nobody coming into reception. But overall, we are turning out to be able to work at home quite effectively. And I think that's one thing that a lot of knowledge-based industries will be thinking about, is particularly if people are reluctant, and we have some data suggest they may be, to be anxious about working in a busy, crowded office, whether we'll actually, repurpose some of our offices in future. There's already one where the lease expired, and we were planning to go into a flexible working space, and now they're all working at home. They don't have an office anymore. So that's saving some money. And I can see that being potentially a big change. I could see lots of people only coming into the office a couple of days a week in the future.
Yeah, it was interesting when I was at Cisco, there was some very similar things going on. Cisco was obviously on the vanguard of remote working because of the internet and everything else. And they say, the future is here, but it's not equally distributed, right?
Yes, Ian Gibson's favourite quote, yeah.
And one of the things that I found was that one of the things that hadn't caught up necessarily was how do you then adapt, right? In a world where people are at home and they're all coming into the office at different times of the week and they never see each other physically. So I think there are some things that will have to kind of be worked out. But I think
Yeah.
you're right, this is definitely an accelerating event.
We have WhatsApp groups, so we've tried to get everybody into a WhatsApp group for their different teams. The management committee have one. We have face-to-face conversations on MS Teams 3 times a week. So we're talking to each other. I do a broadcast to the whole company, which I used to do sort of every 3. I used to have face-to-face meetings with everybody in different offices. It was a bit of a bind traveling around, but I did it quarterly. And now, of course, I'm doing, and I think it's necessary in a crisis, but I'm doing weekly calls, and there's 1,200, 1,300 people on the call, just for a 20-minute update of where we are and what's happening, because what we know is that people in a crisis, demand for information rises. So every week I'm like, what on earth am I going to say to them this week? But we usually have some new things to say. And the feedback, I mean, to be honest, I think, and I think it's a bit like the effect that we've seen with the rally around the flag effect for governments. People support the leadership generally, assuming they're not Donald Trump, in times of crisis. And, people's responses have been very positive. So I think it's important to reach out to people. It's a terrible American expression, but to connect with people. And the demands are, particularly in the times of crisis, that you have to do more of that.
Yeah. Well, I have a saying I say with some of my clients. I say, when times get challenging, tweet like Trump, which is just a memorable way of saying, don't over-communicate, right? Over-communicate.
Yeah.
You're never going to be told off for communicating too much in these moments.
Yes. No, people want to know that, you're looking at the issues. They need a bit of empathy about people's situations. So that's what we're trying to do, and being transparent. We've got a workers' consult. We haven't been sort of consultation led internally particularly, but we've now had to set up formal consultation over pay cuts and reducing pension contributions. But actually, we've had a lot of people volunteering. I mean, I've taken a pay cut and served the management team, but a lot of people have actually come forward and just volunteered for pay cuts even before we've made them mandatory through consultation. So, people do want to make it the contribution, because what we did what we're trying to do is what we did in 2008, which you saw in the economy as a whole, of course, which was trying to protect employment where possible. And I think the fact that in Britain the government's furlough scheme has been extended by another month gives a bit longer for people to sort of try and see where the dust settles, and therefore what the implications are going to be in terms of employing people.
So you talked about 2008 a couple of times, and you started to talk about some of the decisions you've been taking. Do you have a kind of a mental playbook? So, like, what are the 2 or 3 things that you focus on?
Just, look at be brutal. The evidence is that all of us have optimism bias, and we all hope that everything's going to turn out well. So if you know that you have a natural bias towards optimism, then you have to be brutal about looking at the worst case scenario, which we've done. So, I mean, if you've got any job, at the moment we've got projects that have been put on hold for more than 3 months. We've taken them off the books. So we aren't sitting there pretending they're, and until they're definitely going to confirm that they're coming back, they're not on our books. So we can see what our revenue would look like without them, and therefore what our cost base would look like without that revenue. So I think that's sort of brutal honesty, but also just transparency with people. People aren't stupid. They know that the company we can't lose money. You can do for a short time or month to month, but you can't do it. You can't do it for very long. So just be transparent with people. I mean, in 2008, I had to let go of 90 people in the end, but we did it in a way that was reasonably sensitive in terms of who we chose, and morale went up. So we haven't had to do that this time, and people are absolutely rallying round the business. But we don't know what the recovery looks like. If we can't do any face-to-face interviewing for a year, then there are some other things that will have to happen. But I think it's just important to be transparent and understand other people's positions, really.
What's the most difficult or complex decision that you've had to take, where in this time when visibility comes right down?
Well, I think, it's making decisions. At some point, you've got to make a decision about what's going to happen in the future. And at the moment, we haven't had to make that. And I think it will get. We've had the original rush of cancellations. So people, one of our clients just said, look, we're not going to, all that work we wanted you to do this year, we're moving it to 2021. Or another of our clients said, what did they say? We just cancel. They've got 30 people working for them. They don't do any work for anybody else. They're just doing this one project. And they just said, oh, we're canceling everything now for 6 months. And it's like, okay. The client's almost, the direct client was almost in tears, actually, because they've worked with these people for a very long time. But we've been able to furlough them and redeploy them. The most difficult decision, I think, is really when we're going to come out of lockdown. And so it's a stage series of decisions. But at some point, we're going to, if we're unable to resume or we find out things are impossible, we'll have to take some tough decisions. But at least I think so. We're not rushing into things, but we're being transparent. So far we've got a tapered form of pay cuts. I didn't rush into just doing pay cuts across the board because junior people in my industry don't earn that much, and paying rent to live in London is pretty expensive for them. So I wanted to do tapered. So we haven't. I don't think I've had any terrible decisions so far. Everything's been pretty much a no-brainer so far. It will get more difficult if furlough ends and you've got to pay 200 people to do nothing, and you've got no income coming in to cover their wages. Then that's going to be more tricky. But so far, that's been moved, of course, back until the 1st of July. So we will see where we are on the 1st of July.
And when you look back at previous times, 2008, for example, was there a surprising side effect or outcome or a positive outcome of those challenging times?
I think when we looked back at the data for 2008-9, and the most depressing thing was not the, and I think this is the challenge with COVID-19. So originally, many forecasters were saying there's going to be a V-shaped recovery. I think they're now talking about a U-shaped recovery, or even some sort of L-shaped recovery where you go down and stay down. Because I think certainly looking at our business after 2008, it carried on shrinking. It shrank in 2009, 2010, and 2011. We only reached bottom in 2012. Looking at our business, looking back at the data, and I was CEO in charge, but of course I've forgotten it in the good years of the last 8 years or so. And so I think the challenge is as so we've basically closed the hospitality and large travel and large parts of retail. And the question is how those knock-on effects play through the economy. And it's not clear yet. Even as those things reopen, they won't reopen in the same way. And that means, if we see what we've seen in China with people, just shops reopening, but spending still very, very constrained because people are worried about their jobs. Yeah. So they start saving. They've already noticed that they can get by without a whole load of oat milk lattes and chicken sandwiches from Pret every day. And they've noticed they're saving quite a lot of money. They've noticed by not going out, they're saving quite a lot of money. And because they know that things are still rocky, so there's a sort of, because, the economy is ultimately heavily influenced by consumer psychology, there's a real risk that all of those knock-on effects keep happening, and actually our business doesn't get back to growth until 2022. And I think that's probably a more realistic scenario potentially.
Yeah, so that really changes the way you have to think and plan, right? If that's the belief.
Yeah. And for millennials, we noticed after the 2008 recession that millennials were the people with the lowest. So these are people born between about 1980 and 1995. But these were the people with the lowest levels of trust in the economy, and that they were because they were hit as they graduated by the recession after 2008. But the challenge is now they're now having kids and they've now hit this. So they've had a sort of double whammy in one sense. But no, absolutely, I think that's the challenge, that the recovery won't be V-shaped, and it's a bit like an earthquake, but with very long aftershocks. And so we're just in the foothills, I'm afraid. It feels like of what's really going to come. There will be some benefits. Some people will develop new business models, direct to consumer. We're doing all sorts of things digitally that we would have regarded as difficult before, or obviously not preferable to doing things face to face, but they're actually turning out to work quite well. So there will be some upside, but in terms of overall money flowing around the economy, I'm pessimistic.
So how do these difficult times force you to grow as a leader? How have you actually been stretched yourself?
I think the main thing is people want they want authenticity, they want clarity. I mean, they want to know that somebody has a plan, even if you don't have a plan, you better make it appear that you do have a plan. Because clearly there's a huge amount of uncertainty. You've got to show up at this point, and you've got to be frank with people. You've got to be empathetic. You're never going to please everybody, but you've got to be clear. You end up working harder than ever. I mean, I've taken a 20% pay cut, and I'm working longer hours than ever. But no, they want to see you. They want clarity, that you need to over communicate. You've got all your different stakeholders that you've got to talk to, reassure, and also stop false optimism. I think that's the other thing. There's a sort of hope that people can ignore things and it will all get better, and it won't. So those are the sort of challenges. I wouldn't say any of them are particularly rocket science. It just requires visible leadership, and that means getting out there and doing it. If you're one of those people who suffers from imposter syndrome or something like that, then you're going to have more difficulty at this sort of time, of course. But it's like anything. I do a lot of public speaking anyway, so doing the webinars for 1,200 people is fine. It's something I do for a living, sort of thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's what people want. They want to see, and they like seeing the pictures. I even get people asking me, "What's that picture behind you, Ben?" and things like that. So fine. I mean, one thing that the crisis is doing is letting us all see more of each other's lives and backdrops and domestic existence, of course, which in some ways is positive.
Yeah, it's it can add a different dimension. I think it's just the question of when everyone's working remotely, there can be a tendency to become transactional, in teams and in relationships, because you don't get.
I find it. I mean, I don't know about you, but I've found actually that I have more informal, sort of friendly chats with people because you're now seeing their domestic lives. So we never had a chat group for the management team. We'd all talk in emails, and now we're sending each other ridiculous little video clips and gifs, God knows what else, that like everybody else does. And I think that I assume that seems to be happening across the business. So people actually, in some ways, feel closer. I mean, and it's something that we've seen in research with the general public. We've got 80% of people saying that they're talking more to relatives and to people who matter to them.
Yeah. Oh, fabulous. Is there anything else from the research that you think has surprised you in this time?
Yeah, I mean, what's come out of it in Britain? I mean, Britain is one of the more compliant countries, and there's 90% support for the lockdown, 80% support for the police. There's been a 16-point surge in support for the government, which has been also replicated across Europe, in France, in Italy, and in Germany. Angela Merkel has got 79% satisfied, which in political terms is like walking on water, quite frankly. But most people are now more worried about the economy than they are worried about their own personal health. But at the same time, there's a lot of support for lockdown generally. And I think this is the point, that people are anxious about coming out of lockdown, both in terms of their spending, because they're worried about the knock-on effects and everything else, but also because of their health. And, because although the disease does affect older people much more than younger people, there are still lots of examples of perfectly healthy young people catching it and dying. And so how exactly we come out of lockdown is going to be really horrible. Well, it's sort of interesting, and it will be interesting to see these European countries that are doing phased, reopen the schools, reopen some larger shops. When do you reopen cinemas, theatres, hotels, bars, restaurants? That's the question. I'm not sure it gets back to normal quickly or simply. I mean, but we'll see, because the vaccine is the only certainty, it appears, at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely.
Unless we have the other thing the research does show is, at least in Britain, quite high levels of support for Chinese-style surveillance. So the government tracking your phone, and if you leave the house more than once a day, fining you based on your phone's activity. I mean, I suppose the way around it is not to take your phone with you every time you go out, but it's. But
people start twitching if they do that, right? You'll tell them because they'll be twitching in the street.
65% of the public support, a scheme that would let you know if you'd been near somebody that had got COVID-19. So Are we going to see, much higher levels of government surveillance? Well, we'll see, I guess. I mean, that's another way out, along with a lot of testing. But again, our infrastructure is nowhere where it needs to be on that, of course.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? How things that were once considered almost impossible to imagine suddenly become on the table, right?
I mean, the magic money tree. Mrs. May, our former prime minister, said there was no magic money tree, and now it turns out there is a magic money tree, and it's on steroids. I mean, we've got, the government is now paying the wages of, has invaded the private sector and is paying millions of people's wages. I mean, it's astonishing. And the question is, but it does cost, I think, something like 40 billion. I don't know if that's a week or a month, but it's certainly a lot of money. And we may see permanent government debt levels at levels that none of us had ever imagined, and those to be sustained with incredibly low interest rates for a long time to come. But exactly what if the ramifications are like the quantitative easing after the 2008 recession, that implies yet some sort of other asset bubble that at some point will come back to haunt us. So it's very, and the other things we may see, a big social change. If furlough ends and there's now mass unemployment, do we get massive ructions where voters demand the governments carry on paying wages? And therefore, at some point, we'll see when the government can't borrow money easily anymore. At the moment, people appear to be perfectly happy to let the British government expand that spending by hundreds of billions, and nobody's blinking an eyelid. And the interest rates the government's paying aren't going up. If anything, they're actually lower. So in theory, this could all carry on for some time. But one wonders how it's all going to work. Who knows?
It's amazing.
So
it's amazing.
Maybe, our economics, our ideas about economics may be about to be challenged once again.
And if we zoom in really, from this macroeconomic view into, back into your organization, Ben, how do you observe leaders reacting? So what have been like the positive ways in which you see leaders showing up in your team and in your organization, and people who are perhaps aren't quite stepping up in the way?
The worst thing I heard about, which I immediately asked for the person concerned to be disciplined, was that somebody demanded that everybody appear on their FaceTime or Zoom calls or whatever, appeared smartly dressed in business attire. And I just thought this was deeply inappropriate. So I don't actually know the name of the person who did it, but I heard about it and said this cannot be right. I mean, for God's sake, we're asking people to work while there's children running around them and God knows what. And then somebody actually asked them to wear a tie or something. And I was just like, give me a break. I mean, but in seriousness, I think most people are running much more regular catch-ups, briefings, having check-ins, etc. And I think that's really important for people to keep in touch, particularly if they're, isolated, if they're living on their own or something like that. So all of those things. That's the main thing, and encouraging people to look after their own mental health. So making sure that people are trying to encourage people. We're running yoga lessons, mindfulness, meditation. We've got various colleagues who are offering these on the team, but encouraging people to do those sorts of things. We've got recipe clubs going on. So we have all this sort of other activity that we would normally do in the office that we've now switched to online. So you're trying to get people to have a routine, have a separate space to work in, get washed and get dressed into some clothes, but they don't have to be a suit and tie every morning, and those types of things, and having enough time to having coffee chats and things like that. So giving people a structure, and that seems to be important. I think I do a webinar every Thursday at 11 o'clock, which is pretty well attended, and I think I've said to people, do I really need to do this? And I'm like, yeah, we like it. It gives rhythm to the week. People know that 11 o'clock on Thursday, stop what you're doing, listen to Ben, blah, blah. So people like those things. And I think it's important to build those structures for the new reality.
Yeah, it's trying to create structures when you can't physically do the physical ones that you used to be able to do. I talk about structure in life often. The point, you've got the vine and then you've got the trellis or whatever that supports the vine. And obviously the life is the important thing, but the structure is what keeps that healthy. And I think when all the normal structures have been ripped out, you have to build new structures for the distributed remote world.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, given all of this, if what would your leadership lesson be to yourself 10 years ago, right?
Oh
Or
God, well, I suppose
even a
I
bit
sort
longer?
of learned it, but I mean, I think the main thing about, if you're running a large organization, I mean, one nowhere as large as, a global multinational, but there's a great quote from Jack Welch, the late guy from GEC, you can't do the fucking work yourself, as he put it. So the point is, I can't make my people do anything. I have great difficulty just getting them to fill in timesheets if I really put my mind to it. So all I can try and do is what leadership is about. And I've done quite a lot of work looking at average, high performing and failing leaders in the past. And one of the things that distinguishes the ones who turn out to be more successful is often about very clear communication, storytelling, clear delegation, not being a control freak. So you're building a culture, you're trying to build a culture that defaults to the right thing. You can't do that overnight, but it's about setting the ground rules and reinforcing behaviors at the right time. But then, of course, there are certain parts of the routine, which are regular communications, being there for people, saying thank you. So, every time I get client feedback every day because we're a market research company. So, of course, we survey our clients after each project. And so I will try and be disciplined about when they come into me, I'll make sure I forward it to the team, say thank you, wasn't that good? Blah blah. It's these small things that all add up, because people, if you don't do these small things, it's not that people don't think, oh, Ben was somebody, you're busy. They just simply think you don't care. So it's very important to have those routines of regular briefings, regular talking to people, clarity about the story, the values, etc. None of it is rocket science. But what I found interesting is when I studied leadership and we've looked at high and low performing organizations, what we found is that everybody talks about leadership in the same way: setting clear goals, being there for people, all of those things. But then what's interesting, and the project I did, it was about 10 years ago, I talked to 40 chief execs for 3 hours each, and they all pretty much described leadership in the same, roughly the same ways. But what was interesting was that when I looked at the diaries of those people afterwards, you found that the effective ones were actually doing it, whereas the ones who were less effective talked about it but didn't actually do it. So the person who told me, well, actually, Ben, at the end of the day, it's just a job, they lost their job within a year. Or the guy who was so status obsessed that he made people who wanted to come and see him go downstairs to reception and wait there to be summoned to go and see him in his office. And again, that guy lost his job too. Whereas the more effective ones were, literally making sure that they had maybe a dinner with each of their direct reports once a year. So that's 14 nights gone. Then they've got their next meetings with sets of clients. You can sort of see it as almost as a discipline and a routine. Yeah. But if you do those things, that's what, ultimately what good leadership is about. So making sure you have those meetings, even if you don't think they're absolutely necessary, and making sure they're productive, people feel listened to, which is hugely important. And then finally, random acts of kindness. There's a lot to be said for random acts of kindness. You aren't going to thank everybody all the time about everything, and you're not, but random acts of kindness definitely go a long way.
Yeah, thank you. That's really helpful. And again, it reminds me of the structure and the life thing, right? You go ahead and put those dinners in the diary, and that's, but then got to show up in them. You've got to listen, you've got to engage. But if it's not there, it's just words again. I'm going to listen to my team.
So you have to make time for those catch-ups. I'm not as good as I should be with my direct reports, but I figure they're all quite well paid and they should know when to ask. They know I'm available if they need me, but I do try and make sure they're in the diary. But in terms of standing up in front of the staff, the regular communications, you've got to do it.
Yeah. Got to do it. Thank you. So, hey, a few quick fire questions just to finish. So, what's your favorite book?
Oh my God. My current favorite book is a book called Uncharted by Margaret Heffernan, who looks at our ability to predict the future, which at the moment, of course, is much in demand. And Margaret, of course, writes about how it's not possible to predict the future, but there are things you can do to be more resilient in an uncertain world. So that's one of my favorite books at the moment, but I'm not sure I have a totally favorite book ever. But anyway, that's very strongly recommended. Uncharted by Margaret Heffernan.
Perfect, thank you. What about your favorite productivity tip?
Oh God, I'm all of the evidence is do not multitask, focus on some tasks. And the other productivity tip is do the difficult thing that you don't want to do. Start that at the beginning of the day. Do that. Do not defer it to the end of the day. Right. Don't do the easy things and tick them off. Do the difficult things. Then you'll find that you've made far more progress. Oh, and also do it now. Don't do it today. Don't delay. You've got something difficult. Just do it
now. Yeah.
Generally.
Do it. What about your most inspiring leader?
Oh God, that's interesting. I'm trying to think. I mean, I've seen. Good question. I don't have any. I don't know if I have anybody particularly who. I mean, you hear these great stories. My favorite leadership story is JFK going to the loo at Cape Canaveral in the 1960s. And so stop me if you've heard this one, but he's going to the loo, and it's of course race riots in America at this point. And he's having a pee, and he asks the black guy who's sweeping up, he says, "What do you do here at Cape Canaveral?" And he goes, "Oh, I'm working to put a man on the moon." And it's that sort of sense that I'm trying to think of an amazing, I mean, there's a whole load of people. The guy who led Tesco, what was his name, before Dangerous Dave, who took over and swept up, Terry Leahy. See, I wouldn't regard Terry Leahy as necessarily the most charismatic leader, but in terms of clarity and consistency about what Tesco stood for during that time of success, absolute consistency, repetition, focus, etc. I mean, in the end, of course, they overreached themselves, and there's a saying, all political careers end in failure, but there's another saying that all careers end in failure. But nevertheless, that sort of level of focus and consistency, I think, is hugely important.
Yeah, nice. Well, a childhood hero.
Oh God, these are great questions, aren't they? Who would I have been really admired during my childhood? That's an interesting one. Probably some sort of skateboarder like Tony Alva or Tony Hawks or something like that. I was massively into skateboarding when I was a child, so that would have been some sort of anti-hero,
So we're going to want to see you doing some skateboarding now on some social media. That'll be the next thing.
You can see there's an interview with me online in the Daily Mail where they took photographs of me riding a ramp on a skate park. So if you type in Daily Mail and Ipsos Mori boss, you can see photos of me skateboarding. Yeah.
What about a conference or gathering or meetup or something which in normal times you found really valuable?
I often find, I used to find some of the, what was it called? There's various sessions that don't necessarily happen anymore. I mean, Davos is interesting in terms of the breadth of people that you'll see there, although it's a bit frenzied. I speak at a lot of conferences. I like things where you have a mixture of people from different disciplines who, in fact, okay, I'll give you one. My favourite one at the moment, one I go to most years, is something in Pontignano in Italy, which is a British-Italian conference of politicians, journalists, and business people. Probably about 50 Italians and 50 British people, sort of curated a little bit, and we meet in a monastery outside Siena. So to put the world to rights. So David Willits, Lord Willits, is the British sort of convener, and then there's an Italian one, often a former Italian Prime Minister. But I love Italy. It's my favourite country on earth. It's a beautiful place. If you've been to Siena, we have dinner in the town hall in Siena, which has beautiful frescoes of the government of Eve, the good government and bad government and things like that. And you meet interesting people from different walks of life. They try and get a mixture of age groups, so it's not just it's not just people in their 40s and 50s. They have some younger people from think tanks and stuff. So it's always an interesting setup, and you always meet interesting people. So yeah, Pontignano, if you can get an invite, that's always fun.
Beautiful. And last thing is, what's your favorite quote or motto?
Oh God, again, you should have warned me about these, and I'd have thought about it a bit more.
It's good to put people on the spot.
Only the Paranoid Survive, from Andy Groves of Intel. There you go. Yes, only the Paranoid Survive. I've said it enough to my staff, but yeah, that's that point about not being complacent.
Yeah, brilliant. And that's sums up a lot of what you said today, to be honest, right? That got to take a hard look at reality.
You have to deal with the world as it is, not the world as you'd like it to be. And you can try and change it to how you'd like it to be, but that does take time.
Yeah, perfect. Well, hey,
Very good.
Ben, thank you very much. Where can people find more about you or Ipsos Mori?
If you go to www.ipsosmori.com or type in Ben Page into Google, there should be plenty of stuff there. We've got for regular updates on COVID-19. We're doing literally almost daily releases on where the public are on different attitude on things around the planet on that. And do have a look at the www.ipsos global trends if you're interested in what might come out after COVID-19 the first part of COVID-19 has passed.
Perfect. I'll put those in the notes. Thanks a lot, and speak to you next time.
Great. Cheers, Richard. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye now.
Bye. Bye.
I hope you enjoyed this conversation. Now let's turn to you. If you're a top performer who's already accomplished great things and yet knows that there's a whole new level of impact and potential open to you, then why don't we get on the phone and strategize on how to get you there? Head over to xquadrant.com/speak to find out more. Until next time, be bold and be purposeful.